So this will be part 3 for the Flask tutorial, and we should be wrapping this up here today. If you notice where we left off, we had just added some CSS styling so that you could see a nice little login screen that looks like this. So if we come in here, run our Flask project, go ahead and double check our page. Remember, nothing is here at the base page. We do still have our initial test at hello. But for the main part, ours is set up under auth and then either register or login. And you'll notice that we have some CSS styling to make that look good. If we go down to 100%, we can see that. All right. Remember, the CSS styling is just a static file. We serve that up through our static folder. So if we look at our structure, we can see that set up over here on the left-hand side. Okay. You may have a CSS, you may have some JavaScript over there if you guys are going to be using some third-party things like Bootstrap, etc. We'll show that here today. That's where you would put those files.
Isn't one of the requirements that we have to use Bootstrap?
In this week's project, yes. Yep. So we have currently one blueprint, and remember that is our auth blueprint. And the idea behind blueprints is that blueprint is a collection of pages, or in this case, views, that are similar. So in this case, we have built out the entire auth blueprint, which will allow us to have our register, our login, our logged out, our login required, and our logged in user functions. Right? So we now want to create one that is going to be focused on the blog itself, because that's what this project is all about. So we need to go back into our Flask, our main folder, and we need to create our blog blueprint. So let's do that. Remember, we have our auth one here. We now need to create our blog one. So let's go new, Python file blog, and we'll add that to our repository. And we'll take a look at this simple code just to get started there. So this will again import our blueprint. And we're going to go ahead and set up our blueprint with BP blueprint. And then the name of this one is our blog. All right. So anytime we do something at /blog, it's going to show up on this point here. If we create our rules at that point. In this case, we're actually going to adjust some of those rules. So we need to create an init file inside of there, which we already have. That would be this init file here. And we need to let this thing know that there is a blueprint for our blog. Right here is where we introduced our auth. We need to set up the one for our blog. So we're going to grab this piece of code here and we're going to go ahead and import it. Now, if we look at this, it looks very similar to the registration here. However, we are adding a rule that if anything goes to /, we're going to point that to our index one, right? So this is setting up that index that you would normally have on a website. We have to create that rule here in order for that to be redirected to a specific function. Now that we have that set up, we'll need to put everything at the /, and then we're going to have a create view, we'll have an index, etc., all the way through. So we need to create our blog, which we have, and now we're going to set up that index route so that anything that goes to / actually gets redirected to this page or gets shown from this view. So we have our blog and we have our index, and this is simply going to go grab all the IDs, the titles, the bodies, the created auth ID and username from our post. And then we're going to do that where we have a user and we're going to join on the user so that we can get the auth ID out of there. We're going to take all the results out of the database, order them by the created field, and we're going to do that in descending order. Okay. That should get part of that up. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to render back. We're going to fetch all the results, by the way. And then we're going to render our template of blog index.html, passing this post result into that blog. So in this HTML page, we will reference the post variable, in which case, just like you would in Python, you could say for post in post, and then have it all displayed on the screen. You'll see that here in a second. Okay. So in that HTML, let's go ahead and grab that page. We need to go into our templates folder, and then we need to create a blog folder. And inside that blog folder, much like we did with auth, we are going to have an index page. Add that in. And we'll paste this in. So again, this is going to extend our base one, which has all of our CSS styling, layout, format, that kind of stuff. We are going to say that the action, if the user is logged in, then we have the option to create a blog post. If we are not logged in, then that option goes away. And it does that through a little anchor there that's called new. In the block section, we do exactly what I mentioned before. We're going to go for posts and posts. So we're just going to loop it through like we would in Python. We are going to do this little block of HTML code for every single one of those posts. And we are going to display that in an H1 title. Notice that we can reference that just right out of the posts, right? So we're passing a dictionary into here. And in that dictionary, we're going to say the key is title, and it will dump that result in the H1. In the about by, we're going to pull the username out of that dictionary. We can get the time it was created and then use the format function in order to adjust that time and make it look the way we want it to. In this case, it'll be in the year, month, and day. If the user is currently the one logged in and it equals the one that is the author of that blog, it gives them an option to update that post. If it's not theirs, it won't give it to them. Notice for that, it's going to create the URL for blog update with a specific ID based on the ID of the one that they clicked on, right? And then in the body, we'll have the body of the post blog that comes into here. And if it's not the last one, it's going to do a hard break, which means if you guys remember in HTML, this will give us a little bit of space between the blog posts, and then it will go ahead and start the loop over. If it is the last one, then it goes ahead and ends the for loop for us doing our blocks, and then ends the block total for injecting that into the block content. All right. So we have our index page. We also need to have a create page so that you guys can create a blog post. So let's bring that into our blog page, or our blog blueprint rather. That one looks like this one here. So we have a /create beginning because this is a form that we're filling out. We'll have a get and a post. And just like we had before, this one is going to have this decorator of login required. If you remember in our auth, this login required decorator allows us to double check that the user is logged in. And if so, it sets the session cookie. So this is saying, okay, we require this to be logged in. And then we are going to take the title of whatever blog post we want, the content of the blog, which is the body. And as long as the error is set to none, if there's no title, we come back with title is required. If there's an error, we'll flash it. If everything's good, we're going to insert into the database for the post table, the title, body, and the author ID of what came in here. And for the values, we're going to get that from the title and body of what they submitted. But because they're a user logged in, we have our little G option, and that G.user, we're going to grab the ID out of our session cookie. Right. Once we execute and insert that in, we have to commit that change, and then we're going to redirect them back to the index page. If this is not being posted and they're pulling it for the first time, they will get sent to the create.html page, which is what we'll need to create next. So we'll grab this little chunk of code. Notice how these HTML pages are extremely small, and that's because we have that template inheritance. It allows us to not have to repeat ourselves on every single page. So over here on this new HTML, we'll have create. And this will again extend our base. In the header, we're going to go ahead and say this is a new post. And then inside our content, we're going to have a nice little simple form that has a title, the name, the body that comes in, and we're going to save those values with a submit button. Pretty simple post. We also need to have an update. Remember that if there's a one there and it matches the ID of the user that is logged in, they have the option of clicking edit and then being able to log into that. So we are going to add our get post option here. Now we have to do get post in order to find the post of the data that we have in there. And then from there, we'll use update in order to get that post out of there, right? So chicken and egg, we need to have a function that will do a lookup in the database. And if we get called on this update, we're going to go ahead and run that function to pull the data out of the database in a form that we can fill it out. So in blog, we're not going to have a view here. This is simply a function. Notice that if it was a view, we would have the decorator up here of @bp.route. This is just a simple function. And then the function associated with that is going to be the route that we will use, which is this one here. This one will allow us to grab the ID of whatever blog post we clicked on edit. We'll get to the update page. The first time we're going to render that as just a page that they can go in, like a form they can fill out. We'll actually dump the data into the form of what's currently in the database. And then if everything goes well, they hit submit. We just resave all that data. It's very, very similar. An update is going to be very similar to a create. Notice the only difference here is it runs a post.getID first to grab the information from the database, then fill it into that same HTML file, essentially. All right. So if we look at our update.html, you'll notice it's very, very similar to what we had before. Only area is that we're going to dump that information into it. So in this blog, we'll have a new HTML update. And in this update, we have the same exact form that we had before, only now we're going to have the option of saving it. In that form action, we also have an option to just delete the post. And then if we do delete that post, then we have a submit for a danger style button. If we look at our class of danger inside of our CSS, you'll notice that danger makes this red. So there'll be a red button essentially that will allow them to delete the post if they want to delete it. They will get an on-click, are you sure? Notice that that is some JavaScript, very basic format of this, and ask them if they're sure if they want to delete that post. Okay. So we now have those two forms and everything looks good. We also have the ability to delete that log post. Therefore, we just need a route that will send us to that delete, and it's just going to delete it out of the database. So let's add that to our blog blueprint. And there we go. We have the ability to now delete that post. Notice that to delete it, it's required we logged in and that we pass that ID to /delete in order to remove that from our post. All right. So that should be there. That should give us a fully working project at this point. Let's go ahead and stop our server. Let's run our server. And you'll notice now we have this blog post right here at the main slash. We still have our /hello, which we should probably remove at this point. I'll show you that more here in a little bit. We also have the ability to go to auth, register, and we can register. If you notice on our main page, we still have our auth, register, and login. Note that the reason we get login and register here is we are not currently logged into this system. So if we log in, and I don't remember our logins for this.
User and pass.
Yeah, there you go. User and password. Now that we're logged in, we can see up at the top, this dynamically changed. That code for dynamically changing comes from our base HTML, and it just double checks to see if the user is logged in with a G user, AKA is there a session cookie? And if they are, pass in logout. If not, you pass in these two variables down here, which would show up at the top. We can create a new post and we get our page here for creating a new post. We could set a title and hit save. Since we are logged in as this user, we see this edit over here. And on this edit, we have the option to edit this post and hit save. We also have a separate form, which if you look closely is red inside the context box. And we will get a JavaScript pop up whether or not we're sure. We can hit OK, and it would go ahead and delete it out of the database. All right. If we adjusted this one and we edit this and we set this title as my first post and hit save, it would go ahead and update that post to be up there at that time. Notice that we're sorting them by these timestamps. So if I create another one, hit save, it's going to put the newest one up at the top. All right. When it's doing these requests to fetch these from the database, we can see that happening on the backside here. So for example, that last request was for us to do a create, which then passed us to the main website. We can see the posts that we did in order to do the update. We can also see the posts that we did to delete everything on the back end. We can also go look at our schema, and that looks good, but what we really care about is our database. So if we look at our Flask and we come down here to our column on the right, and we look at our ID, and we can see we have 2 posts in the table. So we have this first entry and then this second entry here. We can also look in our IDs for the usernames and the passwords, and we can see we have those in here as well. All right. So if we're currently logged in as user and we have Jason there, let's log out, log in, and I have Jason. I believe I set that as the same one. I don't remember what I set that as now. Yep, nope, let's just register a new one. Okay, and we log in as my student. All right, you'll notice that we no longer have edit buttons on these 2 posts. We can create a new one. And there's nothing restricting us from doing this on this side, and we can have our own little blog post here. Note that I only get an edit button for the one I'm logged in as. If I log back in as my user, I can now only edit the ones for this user and not the one for my student. Okay. So you could add some features here, like maybe a super admin type thing where they could edit all posts no matter what. You could have an author, you could add, there's all sorts of things you can add to make this project work. But at its very basic form, when we log in and just come straight to our page, we can see all these blog posts come out. All right. Let's go ahead and commit those changes. So let's stop that. And we're going to create our blog blueprint and pages. Okay, great. So now the next step is to make this project installable. And right now, all you have is a project that's out there on your GitHub. To make this installable, which means you want the ability to pip install your project. You guys have done that with other packages, right? We would have to create this PyProject TOML file, in which case you could set this up as Flask. You would set up a description, the dependencies that would be required in there, the build system you could set up. And then from there, you could do pip install E, and you just point to the project files that are in there. We're not going to do that in this class because I want you to have it as your Git project. You're going to check out that code. But if you were to distribute this to other users, this is how you would go ahead and build your pip project. Once you get it here, you could submit it to the pip repository, and it would allow you to be able to pull that stuff out and install it. Okay. You also have the ability to do test coverages. It's important that you consider writing unit tests for your application, which will allow you to check your code and make sure it works the way you expect. Kind of what we just did manually by adding in a blog, removing a blog, doing those things in between. The problem is that's generating a bunch of stuff in the database. And so you have the ability to do tests that would run functions against your project and make sure that everything's testing out okay. The closer you get to 100% coverage, the more comfortable you can be that making a change won't unexpectedly change other behavior. It will run and check and make sure that anything you add doesn't break something else. We're, again, not going to do that in this particular section here, but you could go through and do this code. Again, the point of this class is to not necessarily make you experts in building web applications. The point of that is that you have the ability to build some of this stuff on the fly. From a cybersecurity perspective, the idea is to build it up for phishing websites or something like that based off data that you're gathering along the way. For others that are in this class, this will at least get you set up, and then you should explore the testing and the coverage, that kind of thing, in order to inject that. What would be helpful is you create this data.sql file. And what that will allow you to do is insert some basic username and passwords into the database, and it will tell you where you want to insert them in. This is all SQL commands, right? The idea here is if you build out this SQL one, you don't have to check out your project, manually go add a user, a name, a password, just like we did for all those checks. This will immediately inject this into the website, and then you can run a test in order to check to see whether or not you can add it, close it, remove it, delete it, etc., all the way through. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go through that part of it. You could have a bunch of different checks here to test your authentication, test everything else in between, even test your blog. You know, can we create one, remove one, that kind of stuff. That's what all these unit tests are for. Okay. What I do want to cover slightly is your deploy to production. So if you want to run this, remember right now we are just running this Flask command and then pushing it out, which is the essential of doing this run command up above. You would want to build it into a Python package if you would like to, and then you could pip install your Python package as a wheel. It's a little bit different than you running this Flask init here. You will need to run your initdb when you check out, which means when you folks are working on your README for this particular project, all right, let's see if we even had one. There we go. Notice that we would want to copy and paste in our template. So let's do that real quick. Remember, your template is back here under mini projects. Oops, sorry, not there. Under your GitHub, and then your template. Let's go ahead and copy this content for the time being. Again, make sure your mini projects match this template format. And so in this case, we could just say this is our Flask tutorial. Throw my name up here, it's mine. And then over here, when we get to the installing and we have these blocks for commands, you're going to need to have a few blocks inside of here. So some of you have already done this. You would have things like pip install -r requirements. It's really important that you guys have your pip install requirements not tell me to go install the Flask project. And I've given you guys feedback on that on your grading. The reason for that is if you just go install Flask and it's a newer version, it may break your code, right? So always use the requirements file so that I'm using the exact versions that you have. Once you have your pip install requirements, remember that in order for your project to work, you're now going to have them run the Flask init command. So it would be flask --app flaskr, and then you will do your initdb command. They must run this or your project will not work. Then after that's ran, you would have something like Flask, --app flaskr run, and that will run the application. All right. If you set up other things in your project that need to be done, now obviously I need more directions as to what this is. These are the commands, but tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing here. Okay. Again, look at your README, look at the points. It's 20% of your particular mini project, which means it takes a little bit more than just the template. I need you to be very descriptive as to what you're doing in there. A lot of you wrote decent READMEs, but if you actually read them, one, your English is all messed up or all over the place, or two, you're having me do things out of order. That doesn't work either, right? It's got to be done in order. The README is extremely important when you guys are trying to deliver your projects. So take the time to work on your READMEs before you submit them. Okay. When you're building this out, remember that we had a secrets file. If you really want to run this in production, you need to make sure that you run a hashtag here or generate this hex code. And then when you want to run this, you would need to run it with some kind of WYSIWYG server, something like Waitress isn't available. Or if you're running this on, like, say, DigitalOcean's Droplets, you could do this behind a G-Unicorn server or something like that in between. There's several different ones that you can use for that purpose. Okay. Let's see here. On the keep developing, this is kind of the stuff I want you guys to take a look at and think about. There's a lot more in Flask than what you saw here, right? This is literally just scraping the surface of what's in there. So you could take this project and then you could see what else you could do with things like the Jinja templates, Click, a couple other things behind the scenes there. But what you should also look at is seeing how you could develop this project a little further. As a matter of fact, your mini project will follow along these similar lines. So if we see something like, let's see here, a search box that filters the index page by a name, we could probably generate a way to do that. We would have to add some code. For simplicity here, let's take a look at our project, and it should still be running. Let's make sure we are. So we talked about using Bootstrap, for example, right? And if we log back into this user account, let's take a look at one of these here. And instead of this delete and then popping up in JavaScript, we can make this look pretty cool with something like Bootstrap. So let's go look at Bootstrap. And so Bootstrap allows us to build a responsive website. You guys may have seen these when you're out on the internet. It looks pretty good on your computer. You get to your phone and it looks like garbage, right? What this does as a responsive website is it has the ability to adjust your code based off what is viewing it. So whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, a laptop, desktop, whatever it may be, you can adjust based off the resolution of whatever people are connecting to. And so you can build both a mobile website and a real website all at the same time. You can use just frameworks like Bootstrap in order to do that for responsiveness. So in our case, you have two different ways of installing Bootstrap or utilizing Bootstrap. The way we're going to do it is use their CDN. And so we just need to add these extra lines to our base config. So let's do that here shortly. You also have the ability to use their SaaS, which is just kind of a modular components and things that we could use inside of there. You can see with different variables what we would adjust and set. Typically, you would have components and tables that you're going to be using inside of there. If we come up here and look at the examples, this is a great way to get started. So you scroll down, we could see a page that looks like this, and you can see these primary buttons and a secondary button that when I hover over it, it highlights. We could do a centered screenshot up here, left, right. Ooh, this is a nice little vertically aligned to the right centered sign up form. Maybe we want to adjust our registration page to use something like that. All right. We could use dark colors, light colors. They have all these different pages of stuff that you could use as examples. If we go to the documentation, this is where you would want to go to get started. So to get started, we need to add our CSS and our JavaScript into the file. So to do that, let's go and add, you could use Popper or not Popper. It just depends on what individual pieces that you plan to use as you go through there. For us, what we're going to do to get started here is just come down to our included Bootstrap, and this is going to be in the head of our CSS files and in the script tag of our actual JavaScript. So let's steal this line here. Notice this needs to go in our head. And if we scroll to the right, you'll notice that this is using their CDN in order to deploy it, which means you do not have to serve it up in your static file. If you want to use your project offline, then you would need to download this file, add it to your static file, and tell it to pull locally. So for our case, we're going to go up here to our base HTML file. And again, up here in the header file, which is where we're at here, we have this CSS file. We could do a Control V on the one right below it, and it would paste in our Bootstrap. Note that the order that you have these in is important, okay? You want to make sure that if you have custom stuff that it sits on top of whatever you're having down below. And then for the actual JavaScript side of things, that needs to be in the body of your document. So let's do our JavaScript, come down here, and this would be in this section of content. We would need to make sure that we had it added down there at the bottom of that. Something down there. And that could either go in this content block or in the header block, wherever we want to put it. In our case, we're just going to put it in our content section as a whole. That looks good. Save that. Okay, and if we refresh our page up here, we'll notice, go back to the main one, nothing really changed in this, right? We're not really using that Bootstrap at this point in time, so nothing's really going to change on this side. Right. One of the things in Bootstrap that is required in your guys' mini project is the use of a modal. And let's look at a modal here. That looks like, where are they keeping it now? There we go, modal. And so a modal, the way it works is you get a nice little pop-up on the screen that looks like this. And so you have the option of doing whatever this says, whatever button options you add, you could add those pieces in there. If we looked at a live demo, it would look something like this. Notice how the screen darkened, this slid down from the top, and then we could either save changes or close, and it would slide it back. So we're adding this functionality to make it look a little fresher on the website, okay? To do that, we need to have our button in order for triggering that. So if we change our content here for button, let's copy that. Go back into our project and look at our blog and our update one. And let's look at this form action for delete. And notice that we have this input of a submit. We need to create a button here for this to work. So let's hit enter. And there's our button that goes on the inside of that. This would actually need to be as part of our input and actually have it on the inside there. So let's add that just like that. Notice this would be our text. So this would now say delete on the inside there. On our target, we could have either example modal, which means that we would have that in our CSS. We're going to need to change that location as to where that goes. The type of data is on our modal. We're using the button class and button primary. We can go look at those and what that does. Basically, this is a primary button, which would make this blue. We can see that down here, see how this is blue on this side. We could also do a static backdrop where it closes everything out. Notice that if you click on anything outside of this, it will not let you out of it, all right? On this first one up here, you could click outside of it and it goes away. We want to hold them there, so we would actually want to use something more like this one here, okay? This modal is where you would have this in the actual file. Notice this ID matches this target modal up here at the top. Therefore, we would want to adjust to, say, this one here. If you had a lot of long content, you could have it like this where it scrolls down. You could launch this one here, which is a scrollable one on the inside. You could do a vertically centered one out here in the middle, or even a scrollable one out here. There's all sorts of different ones that you can have pop up. Tooltips and popovers. This is if I have the ability to mouse over things or have a popover title of what that means. We could do that for giving ourselves more information. You can use their grid, and the grid allows you to style this, and that's what allows it to be both mobile friendly. You're going to have to do some more reading on the Bootstrap side of things in order to get that up and going. Let's see here. Anything else? You could remove the animation if you don't want it sliding in and out. You could embed like YouTube videos. You could have an extra large one out here, or maybe just a small little pop-up in the middle. You could do even a full screen one where it adjusts the whole thing coming up. Full screen below, that kind of thing. All right, lots of variables and things you can change. So what we want to do, and I'm going to show you another way of doing this. So let's look at this page, right? And we started to add this, but we're going to have to do some tweaking in order to make that work. Now this is where I'm okay with you guys using a little bit of AI. All right, so let's copy this entire HTML update here, and then let's go and look at something like ChatGPT for this portion. And we could say something like, here is a Jinja template file that I have for updating a blog post. I would like the delete button to be changed to danger, and it pop up a modal for confirmation. The user must click yes or no and use a static modal. All right, remember static modal, make sure that they have to click one of those in order to get out of it. All right, so let's do that. Hit Shift Enter a couple times and we paste this in and then hit Enter. All right, now we forgot to say we were using Bootstrap. Should probably have done that, but the system's smart enough to understand that we're doing Bootstrap inside of there. So if we take a look at this and we can see what we did here, if we go back and look at our button, we have our save, we have our hard break. We now have our button, which will trigger the modal, and then we copy in the contents for said modal, which will allow us to give the text of what this is going to look like inside of there. Notice in the requirements, it says ensure that in your base HTML, we have these two files. Well, that we already did, but now we can take this file, our base one, let's copy it, come in here to our base. Let's now remove, whoops, not in the base. That should be our update rather. Let's close that and then copy in the new one right on top of it. Okay, let's save it and stop our website, restart it. And let's do a main page. All right, we go to edit one of ours. Notice how this button is now bright red, which is a Bootstrap thing. We click that and we get a nice little Moodle that drops down asking if we want to delete the post. If we click outside of it, notice that we can't do anything. Now we can click the X and that would make it go away. We can hit delete and we could say, yes, delete it, or no, don't delete it. And if we hit yes, it deletes it and brings it back to our page. Notice that it did change a little bit of our styling here because now we changed that on our base template that was on the index, not on the update page. We're getting some overriding there. To double check that, if we refresh this and we right click on Flask and do an inspect, you'll notice that over here, when we look at our styles, you can see the ones that are being overridden on this side by the style sheet is being overridden by the things that are coming out of our Bootstrap side of things. All right. So this is a good way to check whether or not which CSS file is being overridden or which one's being used under the hood. Okay. All kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Another one. So again, I don't want you guys having to sit here and design a bunch of interesting things to make things look good or pop anything else, right? So let's do this on our login HTML. Let's go back over here to this Moodle and say, okay, here is my login.html page. Can we use Bootstrap to make this page look better? I also included my base.html file for reference. All right. So can you just copy this HTML in here? Sure. But the problem with that is it doesn't know what's all in your base HTML. So you need to give it some context here so that it has all the information in order to adjust what it wants you to adjust. In other words, it may have you adjust some of your base so that you can adjust that in your project in order to make that other page work well. So let's do that. One thing that I found when we do this kind of thing is if you come right before this one and just do some comment pages. So something like this is base.html. Come down here to where it ends. And we could do that. Just copy that same thing like that. Throw that here. Make sure you hold Shift Enter. You're going to be mad because it'll end up submitting it, right? Do the same thing here. And we could say, actually, this one is the base down below here. Let's do that one. We'll Shift Enter, paste that in. And then we're going to, again, change this and say this is our login.html. Right. Anything, the more information you give it, the better context it has to adjust it. So let's see what it comes back with. And so again, I didn't really tell it what to do. I just said, hey, I would like this to be adjusted in there. Now, if we notice what it did is it went ahead and created their container, which is a Bootstrap way of being able to justify content, add things in the middle. It's also going to use their grid function. So setting up columns and different sizes. You can read that in the documentation on how that would work. And then sets up a nice little script to make that look good. We could also adjust this flash styling to where we use Bootstrap alerts. That sounds pretty cool. So let's go ahead and make those changes in our system. So at this point, let's go ahead and take our login. And go to our login page. Let's delete that, paste it in. And then let's come down here and look at this change in our base HTML. Let's use the Bootstrap version to make it look a little better. And that's in our base. And let's see, that would be removing the little for loop, which is this little for loop here. And we need to make sure our indentions stay pretty solid. Let's do Control C. Let's do. Okay. Save that. Again, stop it, refresh it. Okay, there's that. Let's log out. Let's log in. And you can see it looks a little bit better. Now, it's not perfect. Maybe we want to adjust this or tweak something. But say I leave the username and password out. Well, now I'm going to get little pop-ups like we had before. If we had this, but no password, notice that we're getting the pop-up for that. This is now being handled by Bootstrap. And the cool part about setting these fields as password fields, in this case, if we go look at our login page, we notice that on this input type, the type is password and our type is text up here. What's cool is you can set these forms of required for that to work on both. But the inputs of text and password have different connotations. For example, if I had requirements in a password, I could adjust this to where it would have to be matching those requirements. So if I actually changed username instead of text to be email and save this, restart it. If I come up here and I try to submit this, you'll notice that I have an incorrect username. And the reason that's popping up is because I have that set to an email style and it doesn't match the email style. We could actually change that in the alerts. Notice how that update came up there. Now it's actually refreshed. It's saying you must have an @ in an email address. We didn't have to write that code. We're utilizing Bootstrap in order to do that for ourselves. So we could do @.com. Notice how this is now a pop-up up above. Remember before it just showed up on the screen. Now we could actually close those error messages inside of there, right? That is putting it in the page. We can even have it where it hovers over the page and shows it up at the top. If we look at our code for those in our base, you notice we get this alert warning and dismissible, that kind of thing. We can change those colors of what that would look like by going through and looking at those options. So if we look at that, that is a alert. So let's go look at alerts inside modal. There we go. And this is a warning. We could do alerts, red, black. Notice that they have primary is blue, red is danger, green is success. We can start utilizing those anywhere in our code just by copying and pasting this stuff in. So let's say instead of a warning, let's go ahead and make that danger. All we have to do is change this warning to a danger, save it, reload. And if we go back to our page, let's do a shift refresh. Notice how it's a red now for the username when we get an alert. Okay. Pretty cool little page. It's not over the top. What's cool is you can come back in here and say, I would rather have that fancier yet, or I want to add this, or I want to add that. Again, I'm not looking you for to be Bootstrap experts. Use an LLM like this to get that done. Now, the problem is when you guys are using some of these with ChatGPT, eventually it will lose context, meaning it forgot what your base HTML looks like. It forgot what it did for login, and it probably gave you something completely different for your logout or your register page. So you would want to have to keep feeding that text into here. If you guys pay for the better ones, you can actually set up a connector down here and connect it out to your GitHub, in which case it can reference the entire project and pull it down. There you go. And it's going to give you some suggestions. Would you like to have a remember me checkbox or a link to the register if the user doesn't have an account yet? Let's say yes. So in that case, now we're going to tweak that login to give me a remember me checkbox. It's also going to have a link to register the account, and it's all going to be styled with Bootstrap. So let's see what it's doing to that login page. Now, obviously, if you don't like pieces of this, we could change that, right? That's the whole point of this. So let's copy this login. And here, That looks good. And then it also said, hey, we could change this to give a better flashed enhanced messages to give it a better look and feel. So let's go ahead and steal that because we want to use it. This would be in our base. And we can also have that additional handle, the remember me in Flask. If you plan to process that remember me checkbox in your Flask, AKA maybe you want to set that in your profile or something, you would have to set up that function in order for that to work and then do something with that. In this case, we're just going to add the checkbox in there and it doesn't do anything. So let's come in and stop, restart. Let's do our regular Flaskar and do a shift refresh. Look at our login and notice down here, don't have an account, send us off to our registration page, right? Super simple, starting to look like a well-formed website at this point versus something that we started in the beginning. Now notice when I look at 100%, this is all kind of weird and offset to the left, right? So now we could go something in here and we could say for the login page, I would like this to be responsive for iPhones and desktops. Now, we have that already being responsive, and it will kind of adjust. Notice that it'll do 6 columns for anything greater than 768 pixels. If you come in here and do a right click on inspect, and then up here at the top, if you click on, I gotta go back and remember where this is at here. Yeah, device toolbar up here at the top. This will allow you to set your dimensions as to what this would look like over here. And this will allow you to idea what it might be. So this is what it would look like on an iPad Air. This is what it would look like on maybe an iPhone. And we could set it even up to like a Nest Hub or something goofy. The idea here is that you can check resolutions for different audiences that you may have, right? So look here on an S20 Ultra, that doesn't really look clean. We may want to adjust that for those different pixels. Responsive goes over there. If I resize this, notice it resizes with me. Notice that there's a limit as to when it starts to cut it off, right? So we may tell it we want it to be all the way down to say 50 pixels wide, which wouldn't really make much sense, but you could tell it to adjust those different columns for that. For you grad students, this will be some of the stuff that you have to do in your final project. Even you undergrads, if you want it to look right, you kind of have to add those little pieces in there. Again, use the power of the AI to help you through that. It's right there in the documentation though. If you guys want to see the components for that, look at the layout and the grid. This gives you a grid of how it works. You could then figure out how to use your columns in the different sections that it would look like coming out there. So you can have all these different columns and different alignments. Okay. There's tons of utilities, different things you can look at. There's also some really cool so content, if you guys are wanting to like show tables on the screen or maybe some figures showing up, you could do that. On your forms, you could have some really cool forms that would show up to make things look nice and clean as it goes through there. Components, you could do like an accordion style. That would look something like this. So maybe instead of those blog posts that you have one showing for everything, we could set up this accordion and do a blog post per accordion, all right? That's fairly easy to do. So let's do flush, where it actually slides them down. You can also have it to where one is always open or they are all open like that. You can adjust some of those. So we could come up here and say, I really like the default accordion collapse, right? There's this one, or the flush, where it kind of trims it out, goes down below. You can see where that one stays lit. So to do something like that, we would simply paste in our post page, which is our index page, and tell it that we want to use the accordions for that kind of stuff. Okay. And we already have our style sheets and all that kind of stuff. Looks pretty good. We could add this viewport for our initial scale. This will allow it to make sure that we are doing our initial scale on the width based off whatever we're working for on mobile devices. So you just add a little bit of these pieces into your base code, and then from there on out, all of your pages are able to utilize that. So a good example here, just to close this out, is I will stop this, close this page. Let's go look at our index page. Let's copy that. And let's say here is my index.html to show my blog posts. I would like to use Bootstrap accordion style for the posts. And so this will end up doing the Bootstrap accordion to wrap each post. Again, we're going to use nice simple for loops in order to dump the content of the posts on the fly. We're going to set the title as the accordion header, and then the post, the author, the date, all of that's inside the collapsible content. The edit button would show up as a card on the inside, and the new post would be styled with Bootstrap so that everything looks nice and clean. So one little drop in there. Let's go ahead and copy that. Replace our index, hit save, and then we can start our website. And let's do a shift refresh. And you can notice that we now have drop downs for our blogs as they come through there. Okay. If it was one that we could edit based off who we were logged in as, so if we go to our user, password, you'll notice the edit now comes up as a nice little button over here. So we're starting to get a nicer looking website just by changing some styling and some other pieces in there. You do not have to be HTML experts in order to pull this kind of stuff off. Anybody have any questions on this little Flask project?
I have a question, Jason. So when you post a blog, is it saving in the backend database or is it in a spread file somewhere?
Nope, it's in the database. So if you come in the database, look in the post table, and then we look over here, we can see those posts are being stored in this information. So we have our IDs, we have the auth ID, which remember is a foreign key that goes over to the user table. So 1 is the author ID here, means when we're looking in this table, it is the user that's here. 3 would be my student. If we go back and look at that table, that would be this user is 3 along with the created table. So if it was really long content in the body, that would all be here.
Okay, makes sense.
Cool. So to finalize this, we could say something like, let's close this out. Let's see what AI comes with just for the fun of it. And we enhanced everything with Bootstrap, including styling our various pages and what we did there, right? So that all looks good. Let's go ahead and commit, push that. Push. And those new changes are out there on that project. So this is giving you some other ideas that you could do there, like and unlike a post. For that case, what would you guys think we would need to do in this project to add that feature of like and unlike? Would that be in the auth blueprint or the blog blueprint?
I would think it'll be in the blog blueprint.
Yeah, it should be something to do with the blog, right? Because a post is a blog of what's in there. So you would want to set something like that up in your blog blueprint. So let's go look at our blog one. Okay. Now, what would we need to edit in order for this to work? In other words, the like portion is a function of what? What object? I think you said it there. What'd you say?
Post.
The post, right? So we would want to edit our post to have the ability to have probably just a true or false of like, right? Like or unlike. It could be just a simple Boolean field for that purpose. In which case we would have to go down to our database and start there. Let's go to our schema. And inside of our post table, we would want something that would be like,
Like yes or no, true or
yep.
false.
And we could do a Boolean for true or false and do a not null, something like that right off the bat, right? Now notice like is one of those, so it may work. We could even just call that like post as long as we call it whatever we want, but like would work there. Now, when we change this, we're changing the entire database, which means it would break other posts that we have inside of here. So this is something where you want to think out your project as you're going along. You know what I mean? You're going to make changes, but you're going to have to blow away this database file in order to initialize a new database. There's not a good mechanism for you to add that to this post within Flask. Within Django, you have the ability to have all that kind of stuff baked into the product, where you can add fields, remove fields, set defaults, that kind of stuff. But in Django or in Flask, there's not really a good way to do that. So to do that, what we would do is take our Flask, our database, we delete it, right? Refactor that, just delete the whole thing. It's open, so that means I got it opened up here. Let's close that up. Console, user, post. Just close all these so it's out of our way.
Hey, Jason, can we not rename those existing tables and create the new ones instead?
You wouldn't be able to because we'd have to reinitialize the database, right? The idea is that we already set that up inside there.
Okay.
So you would have to, one, change your schema in order to create those maybe as a new table or something like that. But if you want to maintain your existing database, you would either have to manually go in and do the SQL commands on the database to create that, and then also set it up for somebody that creates a new one, which is what this schema file would do. You would have these little incremental changes that would change over time. You'll notice when we do this in Django, it takes that stuff into account. So it will grow with your project. In Flask, there's not a great way to do that. You would have little pieces of data in order to pull that out.
Okay.
So in this case, we would have something like this, like we just want to trash our current database. So let's do that. And that went away. And so now to get started again, we would come into our terminal. We would need to run flask --app flaskr initdb. Remember, that's what creates our database. And so that created a new database that if we go in here and look at our post and our columns, you'll notice that we have this option of like, and it's a Boolean. It's either true or false on that side. Okay. The problem is now that we add that, we have to go back and touch anything that is associated with the blog to make sure that this option of like is there. If we don't, we're going to get a bunch of errors every time we try to use our product, right? So if I went ahead and start this, everything's going to look fine, right? I log in. I need to actually create a new user because we don't have one. So let's do user password. We registered, user. And that looks fine. Let's do a new post. Notice that we have our title and our body. We don't have the option for like or dislike at this point. That's fine. Hit save. We get a 500 error. And if we come back here and look at our 500 error, the issue is it does not like having a post with a not null constraint. So the truth is we actually don't want not null here. We actually want it to be able to be blank. When the user creates the post, they shouldn't have to either like it or unlike it. You know what I mean?
Opposite of it?
Yeah, it defeats the purpose of it. So we need to change that constraint. Let's stop our project.
I mean, reinitializing the database again.
You got it. You start to see where that
Limitation of Flask.
yeah, you got it. You got it. So let's see here. We got that. Let's reinitialize our database. That looks good. And let's make sure that that's set up correctly now. We're body and that. That looks good. Let's close that. Let's come back here. Let's restart our project here. Log in. Register. user password.
Flask only works with SQLite. Does it not work with Postgres and other relational database?
By default, no, you would have to add plugins or extensions in order to make that work.
That would be a pain.
Yeah, I mean, it's there and it's fairly easy to add it, but you would have to add those. So we saved it. Now notice we were able to go ahead and save our project, but we also have no way of setting that like or unlike in here, right? We would need to adjust this card so that we could show the current like side of what this looks like.
Maybe
So
next to the edit button, there should be a like button or unlike button.
yeah, we got to create a like or unlike button at this point. So we could come through here and we could do something in our posts, right? This one here, whoops. We would need to look at our blog and we would need to look specifically at our index. And so we would copy that. And my recommendation is to come out here and let's make some adjustments. So in the index.html file, I now have a option in the database for posts to have that is a like field set to Boolean and is empty by default. Please add the functionality like, dislike, blog if it is not the users. And I forgot to copy and paste that source in, right? Thankfully, it's still in its context, so it has an idea of what's there. It's good to be in the habit of feeding it to it when you actually get into that. Couple things there when I did this in there. So please add the functionality of like or dislike per blog if it is not the users. So now we got to go look at the ID, double check that that doesn't match the user ID. Well, we already have that functionality, right? That's where this whole edit thing comes into play. This edit button doesn't show up unless it is the users there. So we're going to use that same concept in order to create this add dislike or like functionality there. Notice that we also have to have this toggle like. We need some kind of backend in order for this to be handled on the fly when they go in and submit that piece of it. Okay. So what we would need to do is add this as a function inside of our blueprint. And to make sure that that likes, like here, they're going to use these two icons, right? Or we could tell it to use icons. So let's say use icons, not user icons, but use icons. And note that that's using the bootstrap icons in the CSS. So we'll need to add that to our base HTML in order for that to work. If you want to add tooltips in there, we could do that. Let's do something more like, let's use thumbs up or thumbs down instead. We're going to build up this file just a little bit to change some things. Okay, so now that we have some of that functionality, let's do this. Let's take our current HTML for index. Say current index.html. Please update the full file. The key there is telling it the full file. If you tell it just to update it, it's going to give you the diff of what you should be changing, which is fine, but it's a little more work for you. If you fill in the full thing, it'll spit back out the full file. That's an easy copy and paste.
Hopefully.
Usually. I have noticed that their website's a little sluggish today. And then remember, all this does is fix the HTML. We still have to add the functionality to the core website, which is what they were talking about here in setting up our routes. We're going to fix that here in a minute by actually passing in that file. So it makes it a little easier for us. All right, so we have this one here. That looks good. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this in. Now that that's in, we also need to go in and make sure we have the icons inside of our base. So let's go ahead and copy that. Let's go look at our base file and add that up here at the head. Okay. We also, if we want a tooltip, we would do that, but we also need to have this Flask backend to make that easier. Instead of passing this in and make sure everything's functional, we're going to go in here and let's go to our blog and say, here is our blog blueprint. Again, just because it's doing all this stuff for me, you have to know what it's actually doing. Now, in this point, it's not really doing anything that we haven't already done. It's just formatting it and making sure it's in the right order, setting up alerts. Now, you'll see in here, it'll actually throw some extra stuff in here, right? That can be desired, that could be undesired as you go through here. So you'll notice so far, I've just copied and pasted everything it told me to do. That isn't always good because a lot of times it will change something completely unrelated to what we're trying to do, and it will break your project, and then you'll refresh and be like, well, where did that go? ChatGPT only has so big of a context, it will end up dropping a lot of that stuff. I've had that happen, I don't know how many times when you're going through there. So to do that, we could come in here and do something like this. Let's do our blog.py, A, and V, okay? Now, I do want to point out on this side down here, it says if your schema allows null in the like colon, we may want to make sure that there's some kind of default value. This allows you as a SQL statement to alter that code. So yes, there is a way to alter your existing tables. You have to use the alter table SQL dialect, and then you can pass that in. But you need to make sure that you also update your schema so that when I check out the code, that option is actually there and valid. So if you go and make individual changes to your SQL database, you must update your schema file over here. Otherwise, it's not going to do it for me when I check out your project. Hence why I tell you just to blow it away and reinitialize. That might be the better way to do it unless you start getting a really large database in your final project. Okay, so we got that. We got our template. That all looks good. Those changes are good. Cool. So now let's go ahead and stop. Start that back up. Let's go to our main page. Notice we now have the nice little edit icon. It threw in some extra icons for us to make things look good. That looks good. Let's see. We had the ability of like and unlike, right?
Yeah.
But that is our post, so that's not going to work. So let's log out, register as something like Jason, password, and then Jason, password. Okay, and we have this now thumbs up button or thumbs down. If I like it, it's now set. I could go back and switch that to a thumbs up, thumbs down. Notice when I'm doing this, what's happening up there at the top of my page? Does anybody see it?
Refreshing it, I guess it's updating it at the database every time you click on it. Yeah.
And if I click down here, I'm actually doing a post every single time I click on that button. Okay. If we go back at what ChatGPT was trying to ask me, you may see something like, let's see, I know I was talking about it. Let's go back before that. Aha. We could add something like counters, or we could switch to Ajax, which would basically do the command at the point I do it. It would sit there and always listen to the page and update it without actually having to send, get and receive posts back and forth. There's pros and cons to doing all that. Ajax is just a whole nother layer of overhead that you would have to do on the project in order to make that work. But there may be a good reason for that to happen. A good example of Ajax is maybe you commit something to the database, it takes a while. And so instead of having the page just sit there and spin and spin and spin, you could have Ajax to give you signals back as to how far along it is. so it can move a status bar across the screen. Those are all functionalities that you could do within Ajax. We could see these add like counters, in which case it would add some things to the database in order to make that work, but we could see that in here as well. All right.
Hey,
Again,
Jason, so if you go back to that web page where you're hitting the like and unlike button. So right now it's unliked, right?
yeah.
So what happens if you go to the backend database and see if that's been registered as unlike the data being registered?
Yeah, right now it should be set to like, right? Because it's set for a thumbs down for unlike. So if I double click on the database and we can set Boolean is set to 1, which means yes, it's set to like. And if I come back here and unlike it, and we refresh this up here, you'll see it's set to 0 in the database.
Okay, cool. So it posts and it just commits right away.
You got it. So if we actually look at the code like we should and see what it's doing, let's look at our blog. And this toggle like is basically going to say it's false if it's set to like, else it's true, right? And we're just setting that value, basically a 1 or a 2 going back and forth here, or a 0 and a 1, I'm sorry, setting that in the database. And if we look at our actual page in the index, where we're clicking on the like portion of this is in its own little form. And therefore it knows when we're doing that up, down, or up like. It also can check to see if the like, then do a thumbs down, else do a thumbs up inside of here. We may also want to do something like text in here that would be more than just a thumbs up, thumbs down. We could use the word like or unlike. And so to edit something like that, we would put that right here in the I. We could have something like let's see if I got that right. Yeah, so if it's already set to that, it'd be the opposite, unlike. And
it's just a label you're adding?
Yep. And so if we refresh this page, actually I have to add an A there. Stand by. We don't add it to the icon. Rather, we would add it to a, let's see, we could do it to an A field, unless that icon has a title field, but we'll just do that. So let's do a and close the A. Inside there, we would have unlike. Do the same thing here. We could actually do this as paragraphs, not A's. That's the better option. Let's do that. Let's set this to P. Notice how it changed it right away. Okay, so we got our P's. We're going to add inside of here our like. Oops. Save that. Stop. Reload. Shift refresh. And we can see that inside there. Now, obviously, that tweaked the button to give it some gross look to it. We could adjust that based off what we actually tell it to do inside here. So instead of paragraph, if we go back to A, I bet that makes it look better. There we go. So like the post, unlike the post. Very cool. All right, we're past the time. I don't want to run out on this side. So again, before I leave, I'm just going to say, let's make some of these other changes. Let's clear that out.
Hey, Jason, I have a question regarding the May project too. If you could give me a few minutes after the class is done.
Okay. Yep. So we push this out. That'll end this Flask tutorial. Make sure you guys start that. And then when we pick up here on Thursday, we're going to go through mini project 3. Note that you can use the tutorial for a bunch of these different pieces. So I encourage you to do the tutorial to start, and then you can make the changes that are necessary in here. For example, in your final project, you probably don't want that hello page still there. I'll be checking for that. So you would want to come in here to your init, go find that hello chunk, which is right here, and trash it. for your mini project.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm struggling getting my database to work. It still says create data source. Do you remember which video I need to go back to watch to figure that out?
Two is where we
Okay.
cover the back end.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And I'll get this one posted right after this. Anybody have any questions on the rest of this tutorial? Like I said, we'll cover all this mini project on Thursday. That's all it'll be to get you started. We'll make sure what you can do for here. I'll give you some direction on some of this and kind of give you some ideas of what we're looking for there. So
I do have a question on that, on the requirements file when we do the pip freeze. So we have all the, when they install it, they have to have the versions of everything that we installed.
Yep.
Is there any concern whatsoever about having outdated versions of those tools?
no.
Or does it not matter because we're running in a virtual environment?
You're running it in a virtual environment. Now, there may be patch updates where they need to do that, in which case you should be patch updating your project.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the patch update for your project may be updating your requirements file. You push out a new version, it pulls the new version down, but you would have to go through testing to make sure that pulling those new versions doesn't break anything inside your project. In which case, if you took the time to do this part here where we wrote the unit tests, that would be very easy for you to accomplish.
And that would be where we would update our README with the different releases too, right?
You got it. Yep. Yep. And so again, if you take the time to do these unit tests, that makes that testing a whole lot easier. You come in, do your coverage test, you get a report, check to see if there's anything you're broken, and then you go on from there. All right, that's all I got. We'll talk about the mini project on Thursday. Stop the recording.